Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Senators. I'm Marguerite Willis from Florence, the great PD section of our state. I'm sorry that my friend Senator Williams isn't here today, but I hope you will tell him that I missed him personally.
Absolutely.
I'm an antitrust lawyer and an animal lover, and I'm here to speak today in opposition to Senate Bill 8687. In specific, I want to address certain provisions of this bill which I believe are not only anti-competitive, they're harmful to our citizens and just plain bad for business. Competition, as you know, is the bedrock of a free market economy. Competition, good competition, promotes additional products and services at low cost. Stated simply, competition is good for consumers. Now, the antitrust laws exist to promote competition and to enhance the public welfare. They do not exist to protect individual competitors. To borrow some jargon that might be appropriate today, the antitrust laws promote sort of dog-eat-dog competition, at the end of which the winners are the consumers. I have been an antitrust lawyer for 35 years. I have read the bill, which, thank you, Senator, for pointing out, is available online. In my opinion, the provisions of Senate Bill 687 that restrict the ability of nonprofit animal shelters to provide certain services are anti-competitive. And in fact, we heard from LLR just a moment ago, if the SC Veterinary Board were to enact those same restrictions as regulations, I have no doubt they would be struck down as violative of the Sherman Antitrust Act by both the federal courts and the U.S. Supreme Court. There's a recent decision that falls right in this area, and I'd be happy to provide it to the panel. Indeed, the provision that restricts a not-for-profit mobile clinic to a radius of 7 miles from a for-profit veterinarian could really be called a poster child for an unreasonable restraint of trade. And in the antitrust parlance, what that means is a restriction that is so anti-competitive that there's no possible reasonable economic justification for it. Now, South Carolina, of course, markets itself to the world as open for business. And recently we've had some good results. We've got Boeing and Daimler, we have Honda, we have Michelin, we have Volvo recently. All these folks over in my neck of the woods, Roche, all of these folks were lured here, invited here with the promise that they would have a competitive environment. We say to them, we have willing workers, we have low costs of transportation, we have low costs of energy. Come here and we will help you compete on a national stage. We even tell these companies that we have right to work laws. So why, in the face of this competitive environment, would you consider advancing to the full committee the anti-competitive provisions of Senate Bill 687? Good morning, Senator Shaheen. There are only two reasons that are really being offered that I've heard of in support of these anti-competitive provisions, and neither one of them, in my opinion, is compelling. First, the argument that vets carry high burden of student debt is no different than any engineer today, any teacher today, or certainly any lawyer today. And it's certainly no reason that the veterinarians as a group should be protected and no other professional in this state. Everybody is burdened by student debt, and I think the panel knows this. The second reason that's being advanced is that maybe if these if these nonprofit entities.
We're trying to keep people on the 3-minute time, so if you would.
I'll speed up. Let me just, if I may finish this point,
Yes, ma'am.
you know how lawyers are.
We all do.
My good,
Especially the one on the panel up here, the left is a very good friend.
well, he's a good friend of mine too, Mr. Chairman. Now, let me just say that the second argument that's being made here, the notion that these not-for-profit clinics, these animal shelters will take business from for-profit vets is simply answered in one word: compete. Compete with better services, compete with more convenient hours, and compete, dare I say it, by price competition. But in fact, This is just a specter. It's not real. And why do I say that? Antitrust lawyers, myself, study markets. There is not complete information here, Senator Shaheen, with regard for demand and supply in this market, but I can tell you this. There is clearly unmet demand for veterinary services at a lower price point. It is not being offered by the for-profit vets. And these are folks in your market, mainly low-income seniors on fixed incomes, middle-class folks who can't afford to pay $200 or so for a wellness visit. But they could afford to pay less, and yet they are not under the federal poverty limit. And so you've got a whole pool here of demand that if you expand these services can be met at these clinics. It will take nothing away from the for-profit vets. It would be good for business. And let me just say one other thing, because I feel...
If you would conclude, please.
Well, I will conclude. Let me just say, I did say I was an animal lover. And I have 2 Labradors, Bojangles and Cotton Ball. I promised I'd mention them today. They are like my children. I spent $6,000 last year on veterinary bills at for-profit vets, mainly because Bojangles needed some serious surgery. I am happy to have paid that. I'm glad I can provide my pets those services. But Senator McElveen, you know in Kershaw, I know in Florence, we know in the PD, not everybody can do that. It is unfair, not to mention anti-competitive, to prevent these not-for-profits from being able to offer these services and not limit them only to the folks who are so poor that they can't feed their children, much less their pets. Now, Your Honor, I'm used to saying Your Honor.
I'll take it.
Your Honor,
I'll take it.
Your Honor, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to entertain any questions that the senators may have.
Yes, ma'am. Senator McElveen, please.
Well, good to see you today.
Thank you, sir.
Let me tell you, first of all, your senator, Senator Williams, that you asked about, he's got another obligation right now, but I've got his proxy, so he's here on paper.
I'm sure he's here on paper, and I'm sure he's here in spirit.
Yes. I don't disagree with a lot of things you're saying, especially as a lawyer, and I've talked to staff and members of this subcommittee about the mileage restriction, and I think you may run into some issues there, and that's something we got to continue to look at. And of course, I represent Lee County, and really without mobile veterinary clinics, I think you'd be in a bad situation, because my district doesn't have Bishopville, the city in Lee County, just the country, and there's a lot of folks out there that need those services. But let me just tell you this: in my home county of Sumter, I don't hear a lot of complaints from veterinarians or the shelter. I think they have a very good working relationship, and really these issues weren't even on my radar in 2.5 years in the Senate until I got assigned to this study committee. But with that being said, when I started talking to some veterinarians in my home area and pressing them, this is what the example I'm getting to that I want you to comment on. When you talk about free markets, you talk about healthy competition, and I think those things are obviously vital to capitalism, and vital to business. But here's the issue that I have a problem with, is I have a couple veterinarians who practice in really the most affluent areas in my city, Sumter, and they tell me that 3 days a week, to look out the window and see a not-for-profit mobile veterinary clinic setting up in an adjacent parking lot. In my opinion, that not-for-profit is getting some protections that the brick-and-mortar private vet may not be getting. And so, do you think, is that fair? I mean, do you think that's a level playing field, that veterinarian?
Absolutely. That veterinarian can have his own mobile clinic, and there's no reason not to. And the antitrust laws in that instance would answer this question this way. There's an unmet demand there. I don't know what it is. I'd have to go over and study why it is that someone who sets up a van across the street can get patients that aren't going to this vet. Is it because the vet is charging too much? Is it because you can't get in there? I mean, in Florence, until recently, we didn't even have an emergency vet. I once had a dog die in the back of my car as I held him because I was trying to get him to Columbia in time. So there's services that aren't being provided by the for-profit vets. This is a matter of competition. And you know what? There's not a thing in your bill that says the for-profit folks can't get their van and go out and do the same thing.
And I'm just talking about not-for-profit.
I understand.
Clinics. So you think it's not a problem if a not-for-profit mobile clinic wants to come and set up, let's say, at a Walmart parking lot right next door to a brick and mortar veterinarian who's paying property taxes, and he's investing in the community.
A for-profit veterinarian decides to proceed down that path. It's no different than a lawyer. Heck, I can come, park next to Senator Shaheen and offer my services. I don't know if anybody would come out of his office or come to me first, but I could do it. There's no restriction on that.
Depends on what you were charging.
And isn't that true? And isn't that the point? Because
Let me ask you a question. I don't want to interrupt, but, if you've got a not-for-profit who's getting subsidized medication and getting subsidized care by the county, by the citizens of the county, do you think it's a level playing field? Do you think it's a level playing field when this person's getting public assistance and the private is not? I don't see that as a level playing field. I'm an engineer, I'm not a lawyer, but by and large, if somebody's being subsidized, how can they compete with somebody that's not being subsidized? I mean, it's unfair competition. I haven't made up my mind on this bill in one way or the other. Taking a position opposite you, but not my real position. But I'd like to see you address that issue.
certainly,